Welcome to this online lecture. Today we'll be discussing and outlining the final unit for this Islamic Journey course, and that is the Lifetime Islamic Enrichment for the Muslim Soul. Now what you'll notice here as written here, this is an overview of Unit 3. It is not a lesson, okay? The purpose of this lecture is to give you a very easy kind of summary of what to expect in Unit 3, because there are a lot of sections, there is a lot of material to be covered, so I want to explain each section so that you know what to expect heading into this unit. But before I actually get into the content, I want to do a bit of an acknowledgement, and that is, mashallah, and congratulations on your completion of Units 1 and 2, probably also known as the toughest units for this Islamic Journey course, because you're at that beginning stage where you're just learning how to pray properly, learning about all the mandatory and optional prayers, and then you're going into Unit 2, which is learning about how to read the Quran and how to read Arabic and understand the letters. So you've actually passed those stages successfully, and mashallah. So you should give yourself a pat on the back for that. But now what we're going to do is, Unit 3 is a build-off of Units 1 and 2. So because Units 1 and 2 were just the base foundation for your journey as a Muslim. So this is, by the fourth point, a take and go journey. So what I mean by this is you're going to take all your skills that you learned from Units 1 and 2 and kind of apply that into Unit 3, which is your enrichment, your lifetime enrichment for the remainder of your life. Okay? And the last point is whatever learned in one applies to the second. So that's kind of summarizing the third point over here, which is whatever you learn in one lecture or lesson applies to the next, right? And so on and so forth. But this is actually a list of what we're going to be doing in this unit. So we're going to start off by doing Islamic etiquette, all right? Probably the most important enrichment for a Muslim's life. And we're going to be doing more surahs, yes, English and Arabic included as well. The call to prayer, which is two types actually, we'll discuss in a moment. The Ayatul Kursi, and we'll discover what this is in a moment. The names of Allah, the Hadiths and teachings of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Tajweed. Okay. Now the Tajweed, what I'll do is I highlighted this in yellow first of all because this is something that I won't really be covering with you. This is more so something that another brother Dawood actually will be covering this with you more importantly. But let's start off with Islamic etiquette. Well, actually, before I begin, I'm going to start by saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Because we are dealing with the overview, the breakdown of the lifetime of a Muslim, okay? So Islamic etiquette, we're going to be discussing the manners and morals in Islam. So how should you interact with people? How should you behave in gatherings, or how should you behave in general out there? And yes, so what to and what not to do. Another thing is to not be so hard on yourself, because you will be making mistakes along the way, and that is normal. Making mistakes is part of learning. As long as you're not making that mistake over and over again, that's just something you have to consider. And so just some of the criteria for the Islamic etiquette section of this unit is just how to, in general, like attending funerals, attending the janazah prayer, okay? So janazah prayer, that is the prayer for the deceased, and some general Islamic habits and offering of prayers. So how to offer prayers, which prayers are offered, etc. And the next section, which is surahs, which I talked about before, and you're probably thinking, okay, so weren't surahs just meant for Unit 1 and 2? And the answer is no. We cover surahs throughout this entire Islamic Journey course. Okay, some of it is just independent study and memorization. I have to admit, it is a bit difficult to memorize by yourself. You may need somebody else with you, but we're going to be working together on that, because this is our ongoing mission to recite, understand, and at least memorize these surahs. Because all these surahs in the Quran, all these surahs make up the Quran, right? Our mission is to kind of understand it, because it is like a story being put together that you need to know. And that is our manual for how to succeed in this life. So the surahs that in general, some of them that we will be covering is Surah Kafirun, Surah Kawthar, and Surah Fil. Okay? So these are just some surahs. Now, the next section is the call to prayer. And the Arabic term for the call to prayer is actually called the adhan. Okay, so again, the DH sound, so we're applying some concepts from Unit 2. The DH sound is making the sound, right? Adhan. This is the Arabic term for the call to prayer. And now I'm actually going to be covering two call to prayers. There's actually two, pretty much, in general. There is the adhan and then the iqama, okay? Technically. So again, part of the both calls to prayers, if you want to learn both calls to prayer, there are a lot of repetitive phrases and words in them, and these are words that we've learned in Unit 1, right? So Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. So these will be applied to again, concepts applying from Unit 1 to Unit 3. So this is going to be easy to memorize for sure, okay? And again, the second call to prayer is the iqama, okay? So the adhan and the iqama. Now, the iqama is just meant for, is in general, for the simple picture, is it is said before the prayer actually starts, like right before the prayer starts to get everybody ready. But the next section we'll be talking about is Ayatul Kursi. So you're probably thinking, okay, I think I've seen that before. It's probably long, but is it a surah? And as you can see on here, it's not a surah. It is actually, it's almost considered almost like a supplication, but not quite. It is actually a verse in Surah Baqarah, and it is a very long verse, but the actual significance of Ayatul Kursi is something that Allah tells us to say in order to protect ourselves from the jinn and shayateen, or the shaitan, okay? Now, we will be covering the Ayatul Kursi in a separate lecture, and I'll be making a handout so that you can break down the English and Arabic kind of recitation for this, all right? Just like we did for the other surah. So again, please be patient. Do not be too hard on yourself, because this is, if you have a lot of Arabic thrown at you, it's going to be hard to memorize that. So it's important to be calm and work in sections, okay? The next section of this unit is actually the names of Allah, right? So the names of Allah, there are, in which we will be talking about soon. These names describe the greatness of Allah, and if somebody learns these names, there is actually a guaranteed entrance to Jannah, paradise. So this is just the emphasis. It's not saying that, okay, this statement is not saying that, okay, you only have to learn these names to go to Jannah or go to paradise. You have to do many other things, but this is just a bit of an emphasis there. And these names of Allah are actually very short Arabic words which are easy to memorize, therefore. Okay, so don't worry about that. The next section is talking about the Hadiths. Okay, so the teachings in Islam. Now, I remember we covered the 40 Hadiths, so that's it. And if not, we can definitely go through a refresher again. Now again, we're both not going to know all of the Hadiths, so this is why this unit is amazing too, because we're kind of teaching each other and introducing new Hadiths to one another to give us a good sense. And then there's also a book called Riyadus Salihin. Okay, so you don't need to know this name. This is just the name of a Hadith book based on, that's actually filled with authentic Hadiths based on the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay, now these Hadiths are meant for modeling the life of a proper Muslim, so how to behave properly. Okay, so there is some etiquette and overlapping between the other sections. And lastly, well, this is another section I forgot to highlight, but we're also going to be talking about stories of the prophets and just get a general understanding of each of the prophets and what they did, what their contributions were. This is just a list of some of the prophets, okay? So the main ones and more important ones, but I'm not saying like these ones are important, but every prophet is important. And there, as indicated by the last point, there will also be quizzes to test knowledge, okay? So there's going to be no tests. There'll just be quizzes on this kind of area here, okay? Lastly, Tajweed. This is a very interesting kind of section of Unit 3, and it's kind of meant for Unit 2. The reason why I put in Unit 3 is because this is something that you'll be doing in your life as a Muslim. Okay, right after you've gone through the basics of how to read the Quran, Tajweed is actually dealing, to say in my own words, is that it's the proper way to recite the Quran. Okay, so they're just, the Tajweed, what's involved with that is just a series of rules on how to say certain phrases properly and how not to say them, okay? So, Brother Dawood and Sister Camelia, actually from Brantford, they are, as I mentioned before, are very qualified teachers for this specific area. And this is the more in-depth, again, as I said before, the more advanced kind of level of reading. What I've covered with you in Unit 2 was sort of the kind of shallow, what the general introduction, the easy introduction to actually reading the Quran, okay? But this is the more tough one. So don't freak out because they'll definitely go through it with you, okay? So that is the conclusion of this lecture, and in the next podcast, we'll be going through the rest of Unit 3.